Okay, good. Thank you for
Not too late.
not too late. No, no, no.
Yeah, I
Um,
figured you were holding off because of all the introductions, but I figured if Dr.
no, thank you. Yeah, no, awesome. She's so organized. I love her. Yeah. So Dr. Kumari, I asked her to come here in part because I think you'll recall we did a little bit of work with her scholar profile. And also she is, because we're moving into the politics of citation, she's the one who introduced me to so many resources like the one that I just shared with you last time. We kind of had a theoretical kind of lay down. We didn't talk a lot about the specifics, but we're gonna, with Amy, talk about some citation chases that we did a little bit of, and especially within the context of thinking carefully about who's in that working parlor and who isn't. Yeah. Oh, Jacoby, you want to say hey?
Oh yeah, hey everybody. I'm sorry I'm late. I literally just got off work and logged in, so I'm sorry.
No worries, guys. I know you guys are running a mile a minute. So has everybody had a chance to say hello?
Everyone but me.
Well, hello, Dr. Kumari. Let's say hello.
I was going to say, when you said the thing about recording, I looked over to the right because you can't see it, but on the wall behind my screen, there's Post-its from the first semester of COVID where I wrote REC exclamation point. And a long time ago, my cat or something happened and the R fell. So it just says EC. But it helps me remember to record. It sits above my screen and I just see EC and I'm like, oh yeah, am I ecking? Yeah. Hi, I'm Ashanka Kumari. I am finishing up my third year here at Commerce as a professor. I did my PhD at the University of Louisville in Kentucky in rhetoric and composition. I've never taken a break away from academia, and that's really weird. And is sometimes normal, sometimes not. So I always like to preface that because I recognize that puts me in a weird spot. I identify as a first generation student, a South Asian lady, a child of immigrants. I'm our director of writing. So if you teach in our first year writing program, I'm your boss. I don't think anyone in here does yet, but you might one day. And I would love to work with you. And I'm also an assistant professor of English, about to turn in her pre-tenure portfolio. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah. One step closer to the tenure line. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. And it sounds like you've been looking at my work, which is really flattering. So you might know more about who I am than I do today.
Well, get ready. So what I want to do is kind of just go through super quickly, because I want most of it to be conversation, kind of the baseline of what we're doing here. And I also want to tell you guys where you are with your midterm done. So let me just share super quick. That's the wrong one. That's the wrong one. Here we go. Here we go. This is what I do all the time. Let's see. Here we go. And I'll also, the link is in the announcements, but I'll also post it here because there are some links within it. So, okay, let's get this over here. Oh, brother. Let's see. Okay. It's hard. Here we go. Is that the one? Nope, wrong week. Oh, it's right there. All right, Shannon. Here we go. And I'm going to time myself. I want to do more than no more than.
You sent us the wrong week.
Oh shoot. Okay, here we go. Let's go with thank you. Let's go with this week. This will be the one I'm talking about because that's where we are. Guys, why is this still hard after so many months and years now? Let's see. Come on. Oh, I guess I'll stop sharing and that way I can get the right link to you. Here we go. That should be the one. Give that another go and see if that's it. Hey, okay. All right. So let's get back to it. Oh, good heavens. I put the landline here and I'm just going to have to. Oh, hey, did you just call me anything? Or did San Antonio just call me?
I did not just call you.
It says San Antonio. I don't know why we have a landline. All it does is just, ring with calls for surveys. Okay, here we go again. We try this. I got it sharing. Okay. Now you guys get out of my way. Here we go. All right, keeping a timer. So last time we talked about your midterm. We'll hold off on questions about this until after we have our workshop and our conversation with Dr. Kumari. But I'm wanting you guys to wrap that up. You have the last two questions I'll talk about in a second. The main part of what we'll do is talk about the politics of citation and kind of turning into the second half of the class, which we started last time. So your midterm exam, you did this part. Notice that your group activity, you guys did such a rich, fascinating, such a good job with that. So I'm suggesting that you don't need to do this right here. So two things. This will be due on Thursday, the upcoming week, and then the following week, the part 3 will be due. The part 3 is going to just be the same conversation in the same ways that you guys have been having this. I just kind of want you to, as I did with the first, just kind of sum up what it was that we talked about through keywords and stuff like that, and then move into what it is that you want to research. And then we'll slide into the politics of citations and how you can take those up and that kind of shift up in your own work. We'll talk more about that, but you'll be ready and it's still going to be open. Okay, remember that we're going to do this citation chase today. The importance of like, who am I citing and who are the people I cite citing and who are the people that they cite citing and so forth. We don't have time to watch this Dangers of a Single Story, but if you haven't, do. It's marvelous. I shouldn't have opened it because it's going to be loud. But anyway, basically, why does it matter that we're citing the same people all the time? And part of it is this single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes that are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And that just really sums it up for me. And so the big part is whose stories are told, and because of those silences and those citation missing bits, and whose are erased or silenced, and whose are heard and remembered, and whose are forgotten or rewritten, who's in charge. And we talked last time about ontology being that, what is reality, and that if everybody tells stories from their own position out, and then what are we? Who agrees? Who gets to be in charge of what is real? And this epistemology being the study of how we know what we know, the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. And we talked some about what this has to do with, academic discourse in English studies or any places. The basic thing is we're working together really rigorously as a field or as academia to build a knowledge base. And some things come into that conversation and some things don't. And before the idea was, and I still, people are holding on to, that what's in the conversation is the best stuff. But since there are humans both doing the reviewing and also citing, then, what's up? We have the same story. So as I've said, you're supposed to read the conversation. And we talked about, searching for evidence. Don't start with the argument and then try to search for evidence, but just listen to conversations. And that's where the keywords come in, and then locate. And I love that the metaphor is situate yourself within a scholarly conversation. that means that we've got a place, and that place is the Burkean Parlor. And but the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Who's in there and who isn't? And so we talked a bit about gatekeeping, that the scholarly conversation in English studies, just like every other, and all the other forces that make up everyday life, they seem the only inevitable and natural way to experience and understand the world and one another. We don't notice if we're part of it and benefiting in ways from it, because it's the air we breathe. So the question isn't who's in the room, because it doesn't occur to many of us to ask, not because we suck, but because these things are complicated. And yeah, so we go, who are they citing? Who are they citing? And just turtles all the way down. Just, the ancestry is something we need to be looking at. So here's, who are we citing? We're citing the hell out of this guy. We're citing the hell out of this guy. This is the Kenneth Burke behind the Burkean Parlor. And if he built the Burkean Parlor, what do we need to do strategically to change and access the other Burkean Parlor? And I will tell you I'm so glad Dr. Kumari is here, because it isn't, it's uncomfortable and it's not super easy, because these aren't the people who get cited. How do you find out the people to cite? And we've got some resources that she's given me, which they'll lead up to other things and other things and other things. So we talked about, and we'll talk more about this MMU list as one of the answers. And also importantly, somebody put that together. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm going to want us to do move into doing scholar profiles. Who are the humans behind this scholarship? We talked last time about the Cite Black Women Project. You're going to be reading the short manifesto, which I read part of, and listening to the podcast episode, which is a panel where they roll out in a very, very powerful ways what it means to be silenced and not be heard, and also importantly have your ideas taken and repackaged by people who are actually have access to the room. And the thing about not being that person, remember I've been saying that you want to listen to the scholarly conversation so that you can enter gracefully and with some kind of understanding of what's going on. That also means that if you're going to bring other people into the conversation, I personally have to be certain that I'm not driving that conversation. I have to think about, am I barging in to a place that is having conversations that I am not aware of? And we are going to read a blog post from Eric Darnell Pritchard that argues that that a special issue that was coming out, we talked about that genre, didn't consult or deal with many of the conversations that have been going on, especially through Black feminist scholarship and standpoint. Instead, this special issue on queer methods and so forth, it's like it started over. So, we can't barge into that conversation either. That deserves listening, but then how do we listen? Because there's no infrastructure for that. I won't go into this a ton because I also we talked a little bit about it last time. How do we do it? I think I told you last time that I pulled books off my shelf that were, I write about race, and I pulled all the books off my shelf that were non-white people, and only half of them fell into that category. But then you also have, I had some questions I set aside. So what about this person, or any of these people? Maybe they have, other marginalized, identity, first generation, maybe there's some neurodiversity or any other thing. I can't make those assumptions. So the answer is, and I didn't think of this, is self-identified multiply marginalized and underrepresented scholars. A lot of times we talk about putting I in your scholarship. That's the place that a lot of this disclosure happens, because knowledge happens in our bodies and in place. So when we do these profiles, and I'm going to pull back in a second because we're about to talk to somebody shortly after Amy does some work with her profile. But these are like the field, there are humans behind all of these things. And so this person who's a scholar did some very hard unpaid labor to build a list and open it up for people to submit who self-identified as multiply marginalized and underrepresented. And then she made it available. And I'm working with pronouns that I don't actually know. We have to go to this person's site. We have to find out what they're writing. And I'm going to talk a bit about a piece that she wrote that uses Anzaldúa, which is a site, which is a citing non-white person, to think through knowledge. And I'll come back to that in a second. I'll also come back to this. This is where the Anzaldúa comes in. Reviewers, activists, understanding academic review through conocimiento. I'm awful at this. Shop is like, get on your citation bag thing. But we'll come back to this. But that means knowledge, and this is something too that maybe we can play with Amy. But what I did here was pull the article up, and then I rolled down to this citation. And then what pulled up is this particular article, which is the one that she uses as the baseline for this particular piece that says, this is how we need to make knowledge when we're reviewing articles to find out if they, which ones should appear in the scholarship or publications and which shouldn't. So there's that. Where's it got? Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's a good spot. So stop right there. So before Amy gets in there and starts, Amy, do you mind getting in there and doing some swimming around with us, and let's just see what happens with the citations.
Do you want me to start with Google Scholar like we did the other day?
Yes, please. Same.
Let me, because you had Taylor and Francis up, let me get that real quick in my saved stuff. Okay. So, can everyone see my screen? Google Scholar? Okay, awesome. This is slightly irrelevant, but it is something I do want to make sure that y'all are familiar with. If you go to this hamburger thing, you go to settings, go down to library links, and make sure that you've typed in the university and then selected all of these options. That'll allow you to more easily access items that are located at A&M Commerce. It'll just connect the Google Scholar with A&M Commerce. Sometimes you have to do it once every 2 years or so if it's not working right. So now we'll go back to the main set of what we were doing. So, all right. So today we're going to go over like profiles and searching through citations and kind of exploring how interconnected scholarship and that scholarly communication really is. No, you do not have to be logged into the TAMUC accounts to access that. You just connect it to the Google Scholar. And now, if it makes, it might make you log in when you click on the link, but to use the Google Scholar site, you don't have to. Okay, so today we are going to look at Ashanka Kumari. And we'll see, she's right here. Done a search for her recently. Is the screen big enough? It's at 125. So I just want to make sure it's big enough for y'all to read. Okay. Okay. So up here we have user profiles, and this is very exciting because she has one. And so here you'll see that she works for this university, and her email address has been verified. That's good because that it's been connected with her. Sometimes that can, if it's not a verified email, you might have to dig a little bit closer into their citations to make sure you're actually getting accurate information. That's just something to keep in mind. Then also here we have her focused studies. So she's got graduate studies, rhetoric and composition, cultural identity, and pop culture. So those are things that she typically writes about and that she's more current with. And then down here, you can look, see the different titles of articles that she has looked at. It always sorts it by cited by. So it's going to put her more popular articles at top. That doesn't necessarily mean they're better. It just means that they've been cited more. And so you can organize it by cited by or by year. So if you do it by year, it'll always put it for the most recent at the top to the oldest at the bottom. And you can kind of see what's good about sorting it by year is you can see what the change of her thought process dynamic, what she's writing about, what her focus is. She's had about 10 years of writing, but there are some scholars that have had, 3 decades. And so seeing, is there a change within these different time periods of what are they writing about? What are they focusing about? Has the scholarly conversation changed, and have they changed what they have written about because of that? And so that can be one way to sort through things. And we'll dig into this in a second, but I'm going to go over here to the cited by. This gives you a nice little graph to see how frequently the citations have been used from her articles. And so she's got 47, and since 2017, she's had 43. The H index. So the H index is a metric for evaluating the cumulative scholarly impact of an author's scholarly output and performance. That sounds scientific? It is. It's basically, it just measures the quantity versus the quality of the papers that have been produced by this person. You will often find the H index as something that health sciences, nursing, a lot of engineering and that type of stuff, that they really focus on the H index. Unless I'm incorrect, Dr. Carter and Dr. Kumari, we don't focus on the H index as much, in the humanities. So I wouldn't stress about that. So if you see a low number versus a high number for the people that you're looking at, don't worry about it. And then the I-10 index is just a Google thing, that how many items have been, or how many articles have been cited more than 10 times. So these are just, it's good to know it's there and what it means, but really what we're talking about is the scholarly conversation, them and cite, who cites who and why do they cite each other. All right, so first off, we're going to look into You and I, the identity and performance of self and Lady Gaga's. So here, Lady Gaga and Beyonce, so she wrote this in 2016. You'll see which journal it's published in, and who published it, and a little bit of an abstract. Sometimes they're in-depth abstracts, sometimes they're not. And then you can also see where you can get full access. This also indicates since 2016, these are the number of times that it has been cited. But what's also great is down here at the bottom, scholar articles, you have cited by 17, related articles, and then there's all 3 versions. So if we go to the cited by 17, I'm going to click on that. And these are the articles that have used her article in their search. So this might be something that if you found her article extremely fascinating, you might want to look at some of these other articles that used her research, that used her writing in their own, and see how they compare, see how that works along with your research. And then the other item is related articles. So we're going to open that up in a new tab. So related articles are based on an algorithm. So you'll have to kind of make a educated decision as to whether or not they're going to be beneficial for what you are writing about. Because what it does is it pulls the metadata meaning the title, subjects, author, etc., things that you'll find in library catalogs, that kind of thing. It'll pull that information and it'll connect and try and make related articles so that you can more easily explore other topics that are about that. So, so now we're going to go to, I'm going to close these. Does anybody have questions on that real quick before we dive into the next step? Okay, cool. So we're going to go to the repeat.
I'm sorry. Have you talked about the bar graph?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I lost my mind.
You're good. You're talking about this one, right? Yeah, we went over that. So, oh, I did not go over the follow button because you did that last time and I almost forgot this time. This follow button, you can click on that and it will send you an email when their profiles are updated and stuff like that. So if you're wanting to keep up with that scholar, you know that you really connect with their work, that might be a good thing to do to make sure that you're keeping up with what they are publishing. It's very similar to the whole browsing thing that I believe I talked about last time, where you can save a journal in your bookshelf and it'll give you an update each time a new issue comes out. So it's
Before
the same
you
idea.
leave that, let's talk about keywords for sure before you leave that. So I'm sorry, go ahead. Did you?
The keywords, yes.
Mhm.
We
Okay.
went over that.
Where was I? I just lost my mind. All right, I'm gonna shut up because everything.
No, you're good. You're good. Does anybody have any questions on that before I go on the keywords or the graph for what we were doing here? Okay, because we are going to dive into her actual piece. So I want to make sure we're all clear on the Google Scholar side of things first. All right, so let me try and blow this up. Whoop, not that big. Okay, so here, you have her article, you're reading her article, you're like, yes, this is exactly what I'm looking for, but I'm also wanting to see, we're all, right now, y'all are in the part where you're trying to discuss that scholarly conversation. So now you're wondering, who does she cite? Why does she cite these people? And what benefit do they have to the greater scholarly conversation that's going on? So for example, you've got some the MTV News. So you have some popular resources. You also have some books, and you also have some, what's he considered? A theorist, I guess. And so we have Michael Foucault, who is really big in the English community in kind of his thoughts. And so you have this wide variety of conversations that are going on here, especially when you're looking into pop culture research. You're going to have a blend of scholarly journal articles, peer-reviewed, and you're going to have a blend of popular literature, because that is the conversation there. And that's something that's kind of newer to the field, and so that's great, like that we're trying to bring in this. I was into comic studies, so I oftentimes brought in comic books and that kind of stuff to my conversations. So so yeah, so you see that there is a variety of peer-reviewed articles popular articles, books, and then a theorist. So what does this mean? It means that she's continuing the conversation with a variety of topics. Shannon or Dr. Carter, do you have any follow-up from this point?
I don't. I love the part that we look through this and find out which ones are tied and associated with English studies. And as Amy was saying, some of these, the theory gets taken up all over the place. And we can go back to the slide where I pulled Foucault. It's like 100,000 times. The number of times that Dr. Kumari has been cited for her younger pieces. I mean, these haven't been out very long. This is very good and impressive. So things like Judith Butler, that would be one that we would get a lot of hits on. That would certainly be a name that is okay to take up some more. And I think, did we look at that and to look at the kind of ebbs and flows? We did that with
we did that with the other class, and I just wanted to make sure before we got off her.
Let's do Butler that way. If we, yeah, to see what the whether there's a uptick or.
Yeah, because Foucault had a very small graph and it grew to becoming and that was where I brought up the last time.
Oh, huh.
I don't think there's a Google profile for them.
Oh, let's see. What if you oh my goodness. So none of those are interactive. The Butler right there, isn't it?
Yes, but it's a paper.
No, but I mean underneath the name, underneath the like the authors. Is that it doesn't? Oh, that's interesting. What the hell? Oh well.
Yeah, actually, let me see.
Well, do Sarah Ahmed. There's an underline there. Yeah.
Oh.
Either way, that's a good citation. There she has a okay.
Sarah Ahmed. We will do Sarah Ahmed. And this graph actually looks great in terms of what we're going to be discussing. So you'll see, once again, you have your most popular at the top, but then you'll see the drastic growth of citations as they become more and more well-known. That was something I talked about in the 595 class. I was like, if you're, as new scholars, don't ever be discouraged with how often you're being cited by or not, because some of these people have gone decades before it goes really high up. And that's oftentimes because some of their older stuff does end up getting more cited as well. So it just kind of increases the bar graph here. But yeah, so you can see Sarah's articles, books, that kind of stuff that they put out. And then by year, if you sort that, you can see if there's been a change in their scholarly discourse and how their conversations may have been consistent or fluctuating over the years, even maybe topics like interests and that kind of thing. So, and then here are their top discussions. So they like to discuss feminism, queer studies, race, culture, feminology. So for somebody here, I can't remember off the top of my head which one of y'all who's really into the feminism, this might be somebody that would be interesting to look at and explore and see what they write about.
Amy, I have a question. So those top two citations, I don't know if that's the same Sarah Ahmed. Like, I'm wondering if Google is picking up a different S. Ahmed, because it's a very common name in that culture, in that background. What do you do with that as a researcher?
I would say always, like like when we recommend people using citation makers, always double check.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because I did forget to mention this earlier. Never trust Google to be 100% accurate, ever.
Mhm.
No matter what you are researching, Google Scholar tries to do a better job of pulling the most accurate information. It really does. I'll give them that credit. However, you're right. It's very possible that those two Ahmeds are not the same. So that's something to look at when you look at their, so you open up their article. Well, no, I don't, yeah, it's like, you can. And see, it just says S Sarah Ahmed. So at least it's a Sarah, and not some other S. But what you can do, and this is something I will often do when I am trying to explore a scholar who has popped up multiple times in my research, like I'm doing children's periodicals. So I found this guy named Gordon R. Kelly who popped up all the time. So I had to do a little background research on them. So sometimes, especially if they're newer, you can even just Google search them. So we'll do, and then I'll put English lit or something kind of to narrow down. And so there's a Sarah
That's
and
right.
Ahmed books that may or may not be her, but it says living in a life. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that.
Mhm.
There is a Wikipedia page. So let's see, is this the same person based on the information that you have here? This person is from bold.ac.uk. That's the verified email. So does anything on this meet that information that you've gathered? You know, so you do kind of this, I would consider it like a web. And
Mhm.
as you start pulling in these other biographical resources and information, you start connecting these dots of webs together and formulating, are these the same people? Is this the person that wrote that? And sometimes you can even find their CV. Since we actually do have the verified email, I should have started there, I apologize. But you could also like go to that university's website and see if you can find their CV. And oftentimes they will have a whole list of their bibliography right there, and you can do a compare and contrast. And that's one of the ways I have found quite a bit of my citations and resources before, is just by going to faculty's CVs. So.
Yeah, I can't recommend that enough. But another way that I might go about this is to sort it by cited by, and we've got like 13,000. If it doesn't necessarily mean it's the one, but if it comes up a lot and it also is relevant, it might not matter. Sometimes you run into stuff. There is a Shannon Carter who also does feminist stuff, but she's sociology. A lot of times it would just, you might end up with another Sarah Ahmed, but it's probably kind of not super likely that they're going to overlap a lot with your work, or but I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I love the idea of going to their CV, because once you find somebody, just dig in and you know their CV is going to be the same, be their stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, that's trying to confirm people are the same is difficult. For example, ResearchGate, which is where anybody can basically claim anything. My maiden name was Blackburn, so I had something published, and I looked on ResearchGate just for fun, and yes, some Amy Blackburn from Australia decided to claim my work, and I'm like, well, okay. So like you never know like what some of these things are pulling from, and then so just keep those in mind and be mindful. So yeah.
When you hit year on Sarah Ahmed's profile where you are right now, what was fascinating to me, those are the first two I was talking about. What's fascinating to me is that I look at the journals that they're coming from. So I was like, radiation oncology, that's interesting. I don't think that's the same Sarah Ahmed.
No, they probably are not. Yeah.
Right. But I'm wondering if that's also like a tip to just pay attention to the discipline that they're publishing in as well. Because I doubt this Sarah Ahmed is publishing in clinical and translational radiation oncology. That just feels like a big, yeah.
And honestly, that's probably the easier way to go than my route of doing a deep dive into their background. But I tend to accidentally go the long route a lot when I do these things.
I don't think there's a wrong way. I think having multiple verifications is always safer.
Yeah, I think, well, and it's probably part of my library background too, is if I'm going to recommend resources, I have to make sure it's accurate. And so that's one of the ways I go about doing that.
It might also depend on how you're wanting to use this, because it may not be, I mean, definitely look at the discipline. I mean, I don't know that if I'm going to write anything that's going to be used, something written about cancer and tumors is going to help. But if you are doing the kind of splashing around and just kind of following things, even if it's the wrong Sarah Ahmed that's that you didn't mean to start out with, you can chase that. I also suggest that you want to make sure it's the same one. If that's important, then I go to the VITA. I think, go to the number of citations, figure out if it's the same journal. I mean, also when you're dealing with interdisciplinary stuff, it gets a little complicated, but it doesn't, because she's got her keywords that she chose that have nothing to do with cancer, as far as I know. So those would be ways, but depending on where you are and depending on how you want to use this, this is a good way to kind of just pick and chase a citation. And whether it's the wrong one or not, it's all a rabbit hole. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, do keep in mind that sometimes scholars, like she was talking about, are interdisciplinary. So you might have a variety of variety of topics, but within the same general subject. So it would be most likely. All right, so that's about all I had for the citation chasing within Google Scholar. Other than if you were wanting me to go to the Cite Black Women or the MMU list.
Yes, if you don't mind, a little bit of clicking around there, and then I hand the baton over to Dr. Kumari.
Okay. So as Dr. Carter has shown you, there's the MMU self-identified scholar list. So if you download that, you will have a list of names and then their field and which types of journals they're published in. This is good because you're already getting a little snapshot of who they are. So that whole considering their background thing that we were doing a minute ago with Sarah, they already kind of have a snapshot for you right there. Some of them even have ORCIDs, which I believe are also profiles of what they write, who they're associated with, and all of that. I need to dive more into that soon. But let's do this person, because she is part of the website. So let's see if it's there. So here is the user profile for Kane, I believe. And so you will see in 2021 and 2022, she has had a huge collection of people that are citing her. And some of it might have even been because the website was drawing more attention to her work and what she's been doing. So you'll see the different types of work she's part of. So we've got technical and professional communication, and then cultural rhetorics. Those are the ones that she claims that she talks about the most. And as you see, all of the work that she has published here appears to be within that. And here's the reviewers activist that Dr. Carter was looking at a minute ago with us. Although it is not connecting. Do we actually have that one in here?
We do. I found it in Project Muse.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know. It took me straight there, so I don't.
Yeah, that's Okay, that's fine. That's the way library resources work sometimes, so.
Yeah, there it is. Oh, it's there.
All right, so here we have her piece. That's a good question, Melissa.
You'll land on them. I think that I wouldn't say that that would be the best way to get straight to them, but it certainly be a way to kind of get a feel for what people are talking about it. I still really would suggest that you take a keyword and pair it with our discipline so that you can see how that's taken up there, because otherwise it's just going to be overwhelming. But if you've got, like, if you set a timer and have an hour to just look at that keyword, that's quite awesome. And if you go also to that super cool thing that Amy showed us, what's that one where you can just drop a word and it just has a little spider thing.
Oh, Credo reference.
Yeah, so cool.
Credo reference is the best. So as we are talking about that expanding of that scholarly communication, scholarly discourse, one of the things I like about the Taylor and Francis online, there's a handful of, I would say, more of the rhetoric communications, those types of resources on Taylor and Francis. There's some other humanities. Literature, it may not be as heavy on, just so y'all are aware. But one of the things I like is over here, we've got the related research. So based on this article that people have read this one, you can see people have also read these. So this is very similar to that related resources that we pulled up in Google Scholar earlier. Recommended articles are ones that are pulled by the algorithm. This is even more like that related articles from Google Scholar, where it's just pulling from the algorithm. And then cited by. Cited by is very specific in this database. It has to use this cross-ref citations. So I would not stress about that if nothing pops up. It's just the way that this database operates. But yeah, this will give you another way to kind of explore who's writing, and you can, like, so say you like this topic, you can now do a search for this person, and you'll see what their connected is. It looks like they have an ORCID account as well, so you can do a little bit of background research on them. And then you can do a search in Google Scholar, see if they have a profile, etc. And that's where you can learn a little bit more and more about that connectivity between scholars and academics, and see how close people really are. Like, you don't realize that so many people are writing about kind of the same thing, citing off each other, because it all just feels so big. But once you start breaking it down and looking at who's all working with each other, the scholars may not even realize how often they are doing that unless they are actively doing this process where they are looking through the citations of each of their works. So yeah, that was one person. Do we want to do another, or are we ready to move on?
I think we're ready to move on. That's so helpful. Yeah. And then.
All right. And then, so we also have the site Black Women. You've already gone over this though, right?
Do a little bit more, just as a refresher. I hadn't gotten that far in our slideshow.
Okay. So this is another website that focuses on minority scholars and academics, and encouraging people to use their sources. And this one I struggled a little bit more finding like actual lists. The MMU was better about just compiling a list. But one of the things I thought was fascinating is on their, find it again. I apologize. I found it the other day when I was exploring. Yeah, there we go. This gives a little summary of all of, I'm not sure how they're connected to this website, but I'm assuming they are connected in some form or fashion. but you can read a little bio on all of these women who have focused on either rhetoric or humanities in some form or fashion. Like this, the scholar Erica Lorraine Williams wrote like Sex, Tourism, and Bahia, Ambiguous Entanglements. She's focusing on like sociology and kind of that connection between that humanities and sociology and connecting with people through her writing.
Okay, if I can pop in real quick, I love that you've put the MMU list and then this aside, side by side. It's a different kind of advocacy. So, so Cite Black Women is a movement that, you know, if you look at the page for Black Lives Matter, you'll see a bit of the same kind of movement. This is like a paradigm shifting thing, you know. Here are some scholars that you can cite. It's a list. This one is like all you damn disciplines cite Black women. So if you go to the Praxis link, yeah, I think this is what I went over last time, but yeah, it's simple, cite Black women, because the question keeps being, okay, how and when and, you know, under what circumstances and where. Just cite Black women, and then these are the 5 kind of, you know, it feels like a real gentle manifesto. But if you listen to the podcast, you'll hear the mostly graduate students behind this and how it's been taken up, and sort of the pain of some doctoral students who are also making a lot of knowledge, and part of that kind of ancestral kind of push comes from their mothers or their grandmothers, or these are this is important. Well, anyway, so yeah, read Black women's work. It's easy. Integrate Black women into the core of your syllabus. That means not just one off book. This is the time that we're going. In the 80s, when we started multicultural things, it's like, okay, here's the book, and we've got Native Americans. It would have been that way, representative. We've got one Black, so it's the power of one story, right? You're still not overturning that. Acknowledge Black women's intellectual production. That's super important, because we have to acknowledge that stories is knowledge, and then figure out how to take that up. That's where the epistemological kind of who gets to justify what is knowledge and who doesn't. And there's some brilliant theory that especially in like cultural geographies and so forth, that suggests that because, and this is something Bell Hooks says, it's you know, working from the margins, you can see and experience and witness things that you cannot if you're at the center. You know, if you're not being seen and visible. So yeah, get out of the way and just cite them. And it's super easy like that. I do have something I want to share after just a couple slides, and then along this line. But yeah, thank you so much.
Can I chime in really quick to add something to that too?
Please.
I think one thing to remember between the Cite Black Women, MMU, any of these resources and websites and whatever out there, is that it is like something that you have to believe in to actually do, because we don't want to tokenize scholars either, right? And I think that's where like the slippery danger gets in, like, oh, I'm going to cite a Black woman because I have to. No, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to cite anyone. You should cite someone, but it's a more of a like ethos, personal ethos and personal foundational, like in my being, I know that if I cite multiple voices, my perspective is going to be stronger, because you're going to have multiple perspectives in your conversation, right? And I think stuff like this it's important to remember that, you know, it's not just, you know, cite the name to cite the name, but it is a more like these gentle things actually, I think can be really hard for many people too, to like, not just read Black women's work, but also integrate, but also acknowledge, but also make space. And to do that work is like definitely something you have to hard believe in. Mm-hmm. And I do always want to caution folks, like, remember that the goal of this work, or the MMU biography, the Cite Black Women, any of it, is not to say, make sure you cite someone that is a person of color ever. Right. It is to, you know, think about this, like, what is it doing to power structures to always cite Foucault or Judith Butler, who are all those, traditional white theorists. And what does it do when we bring in the voices that are often silenced? And how does your argument become richer? And I bet you it does. Like, I will just go ahead and say it will. But yeah, I did want to like create that. I don't know if the caution is the right word, but just that
No.
caveat.
Well, I appreciate you doubling down on that, because you do, I like the word believe, that what's happened is our discipline has been built on voices other than these. And so it's not an activity and a token problem. Yeah, don't take what's already there and shove it into what you already are doing. That's what's been happening in our discipline. They're just, oh, okay, there's one, I'm going to cite that one. And it's always the same one. And they're not really listening to it. They're using it to forward an argument that's already there. So yeah, don't do it if you don't believe in it, except do it in this class. But but it can be a paradigm shifting too if you are really listening, really listening and not busting in there and saying what's what. I on that note, I do have a couple of slides I want to show you, just because and to lead into Ashanka, because we're talking about the super fast, just the master's tools is always helpful in this thing. Where are we going here?
And I've stopped sharing, but
yeah.
to also kind of follow up on that, the way in which, and this is something that's been discussed in library sciences as well, the way that we introduce people to research and like focusing on the keywords, focusing on all of that, sometimes based on the algorithms that get pulled up through our systems, will sometimes prioritize the white dudes, so to speak. And it's not intentional necessarily, but we also need to be intentional on our creation of the metadata and all of that to make sure that it will pull the most useful information regardless of who is publishing it, or that.
Yeah, that's good. So Dr. Kumar, you just posted something that's brilliant. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, people who took 613 Digital Humanities with me read this book in that class too, so you might remember it. Like, oh, I remember that vaguely. It does focus more on like digital tools, but there's a book by Safiya Noble called Algorithms of Oppression, and she talks a lot about what Amy was just saying, essentially, like algorithms are part of what gets certain research in our face. I was really fascinated when you pulled up Judith Butler and there was no page for her, because I would expect one. If you're not familiar with Judith Butler, she's had a long career, like I can't stress that enough, a Michel Foucault long career, and has published many seminal works, particularly in queer theory. And it was just like that was actually really surprising. But it's interesting because that means the algorithm's not picking her up at the same level, at least for Google. I'm sure she's still being cited enough, but yeah, or no one has created it for her, exactly, which is just really interesting. Especially to put that next to Michel Foucault and note that Judith Butler's a queer woman, and note that Michel Foucault's a cis man, a white man. So there's power happening again there. So always important to think about, like, when somebody's absent, why is the big question I have. Like, it's not always out of malice, but
no, and when it is
absence.
Foucault is homosexual.
Oh, okay, yeah, I missed that.
So I appreciate that. This is the baseline, guys. We have a Burkean parlor. The same people are in it. Kenneth Burke is the Burke for the Burkean parlor, and so all of we have to undo everything that we think we know. And I was going to go through this. I'm not going to go through this yet, but I wanted to point out that if we're going to citation chase, we can actually look at things that are undoing knowledge, like Black feminist thought, but this is Anzal Dua from the border of Texas. Nobody's going to save you. No one's going to cut you down, cut the thorns thick around you. No one is going to storm the castle walls, nor kiss awake your birth, climb down your hair, nor mount you into the white steed. There is no one who will feed the yearning, face it. You will have to do it yourself. And that doesn't just mean like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but this is like collective And so that's why the Cite Black Women thing. So let me get to this super fast because I know we really want to talk to Dr. Kamari. Burkean parlor is a wrong thing. It can't be a room because all of this has been, even the built environment has been built on a problematic foundation that labor of on the backs of one people and the genocide of another. So we've got all of this stuff has been made in the ways that we believe. And so if we're going to think about who justifies the opinion that something is real, and then we're going to have to just unmake everything, which is not comfortable. So super fast. This is Audre Lorde. You'll hear this before if you haven't heard it again. That undoing the Burkean parlor is and that kind of token citation thing. That is the master's tools, and you cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. That's why the Cite Black Women. That's why the pushback. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. So the real serious pushback, and sometimes some very practical, like, so who do we cite? Here's some damn people to cite. So going back to who am I citing, who are they citing, and what happens? And then we talked about this. And I also want to point out this. These folks are pushing hard against this. And if you don't know Traces of the Stream, you should. But this whole conference is built on this book that came out in 2000, and the whole phenomena of just undoing everything that we think we know, not about just the discipline, but like the way we stand in the world. And I think I showed you last time her critical imagination and strategic contemplation and so forth, and that ontology really quickly. But where am I going to get to that? I guess I don't know. I did. Let me just show you the conference really fast because we can talk about that too with Dr. Kamari. So here is the whole conference, and it does not, it doesn't speak quietly about what it's trying to do. As critical geographer, Catherine McKissick reminds us in Demonic Grounds, this is such a good book. I was just obsessing about this a couple weeks ago, that Black women live across multiple geographies where there are different ways of knowing, and writing contests space and time and dominant culture and empire. Again, the master's tools. Taking inspiration from this insight, the symposium traces the Black feminist scholarship of Jacqueline Jones Royster as a central site of new geography, making the fields of African American and Black feminist and critical race literacies, rhetorics, and pedagogies. And the last thing I'm going to say is that this does not mean that we are only taking up the stories of Black women. It means that we are unmaking where we are based on stories of multiply marginalized, underrepresented people, because we've been listening to the same people too long. So anyway, so I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Kamari. I have questions, but wherever you want to start. I mean, this is paradigm shifting stuff that you've brought us into, and I just want to say that it's also a slow burn. This is something that I have. I'm somebody who thinks and has built a career on justice, and also built a career on a knowledge base that is, and the story, my story has started with Black feminist thought. And then I guess somehow, I didn't realize I was doing it, I started citing the white people who were the baseline for my scholarships so that I could get published in the top journals. I wasn't thinking about that, but here I am, looped back. And one of the things that Dr. Kamari did on the regular is, if anybody mentioned, and it wasn't like she was never asked about it, but somebody says, hey, what if we bring Steve Parks? And Dr. Kamari would say, well, maybe we should bring some, not somebody of color or something like this. Yeah, and also.
I know Steve would back me up on that too.
Oh, he 100% would, yeah.
Yeah, I think, so part of it is also just me and my body and my identity too. I'm not a white person. I don't identify as one, never have. And I won't be a white person because it's not who I was raised to be or who I am. And so when I entered academia as a master's student, and we were reading Foucault and Judith Butler, and all the voices that I cited in my first article, which I wrote as a master's student, I'll like add that information. I was actually not drawn to those authors so much as I was drawn to the people I was talking about, Lady Gaga, Beyonce, and Bell Hooks was also originally in that project too. The original title was Hooks, Lines, and Singers. I actually found that draft the other day. I was like trying to dig up, I was telling Dr. Carter, I actually had like 60 or 70 something drafts of that project. And I numbered every single one. And each time the title, you could see the evolution of the title changing. I could not find that folder for this class tonight, but just know it exists somewhere. And that was the kind of brain that I lived in at the time, was like, I have to change it and do a new draft every time, and but it was a good practice for me because then I could always go back. And so to watch the evolution of that was fun for me over time. But yeah, I wasn't drawn to Butler or Foucault. I was using them as a way to talk to the field about something that people weren't talking about. And for me, that was particularly naming and identity and performance. And I was like, oh, Bell Hooks is starting to talk about this a little bit, but really Butler and Foucault are the people who talk about performance and identity. And Butler, I use Foucault as a way to bring in Aristotle and the way they think about Aristotle's name. And I'm like, we're talking about it this way, but we're not like, hey, folks reading this, let's think about it this way. It's happening all the time. It happens in performance spaces, first and foremost, where that article came from. So for me, those folks were less about like where my research interest was, and maybe in some ways like a kind of different kind of tokenizing, right? Like it was my way of talking to the field. Like I was like, okay, for people to take me seriously, they're going to expect this, right? And those were citations that, folks, my professors told me. They were like, have you thought about Judith Butler? You might want to include her in this. If you're talking about performance, you got to talk about Butler because she's very famous for having a very off-cited quote on performativity. And it's just one of those, like, if you're talking about it, how can you not have this voice in there, right? And master student me, who is brand new to everything, of course, was like, of course, I will find that and I will cite it and I will learn it and I will make it my body of work, like make it very important to everything I do. And then I was reading Butler, and Butler's very hard to read, just a fun fact. Maybe not so fun. She's very difficult to read. And I had to write out the quotes that I wanted multiple times and really it was very difficult, and still difficult for me. PhD or not, that stuff's hard. Like full disclosure. But I think what I learned from that experience, like reflecting back now that I guess I've been here doing 10 years of scholarship. I didn't know that, Amy. That was really interesting for me. I was like, what? That's really cool. Or almost 10 years of scholarship, is seeing that I don't have to cite those voices if they aren't speaking to me or speaking to my work, right? Because sometimes it's not about whether it's speaking to me, because you might just also be critiquing that thing, right? So in that moment, it made sense. It was a way in to the conversation, and it was the voices. But in the process over the years, I found other voices. And if I were to do that project again, I think I would bring in Sarah Ahmed and bring her in to talk about performance, because she also does it, but from a perspective that I more connect with, because she's also a woman of color. And I'm like, okay, I see how she's talking about performance. I would also bring in myself, I guess, like a little bit more hard, because at the time I was new, and now I'm like, now I've established my name a little bit, so I can use my own name a little bit more too. Yeah, so I'm rambling, but all that to say, like, sometimes these choices are largely to enter a conversation, but then they're not always the end all be all. And I will say the same thing in my dissertation, which is online. You can always look it up. I cite Bourdieu, who's another big philosopher, theorist person. And it was very much at the recommendation of one of my dissertation committee members. Like, if you're talking about class, you got to class relations, you got to talk about Bourdieu. He's the guy. And was Bourdieu the guy that got me out of bed every morning? Absolutely not. I read him, I cited him, but I gave him a lot less space, and I found other voices that were really the ones that were speaking to me. So I was like, all right, Bourdieu's here. But also, don't forget, these other 8 voices that are also talking about class.
Right.
And I gave that to the person on my committee, like, I hope he doesn't hate it. And he was just like, you're using Bourdieu correctly. I think that was his only comment, because that was my big question, was like, am I doing the scary theorist okay? Like, and I kept both of them in there because I thought it was interesting to trace the history of that conversation. But I was very conscious in making the choice of, it can't only be Bourdieu. he
Mhm.
can't be the only one talking about class in my project. It has to be a bigger lineage, and it has to be voices that speak more to the current conversations.
And even though that was not the conversation that was going on, this was a risky thing to do. And I think also coming from the margins first generation, there are things that you see. So as white scholar, I cite some things that I just, so it's different, I think, when it's also, it just speaks to the structural inequities that you had to cite Foucault or Bourdieu. When you guys listen to the Cite Black Women podcast, or everybody there is dealing with structures of power, and everybody there was told you have to cite Foucault. And if you use the Burkean parlor metaphor, it's like going into the Burkean parlor and talking about the thing that you were talking about, and they're not bloody well listening because they're looking at where Foucault is, which he's awesome, I love him, but they're looking at where Foucault is over in the corner, swarmed by people and saying, oh, you're talking about that thing, you need to go talk to him. Yeah, but I'm only kind of talking about a thing that's a little bit related to that. I need you to hear me. So anyway.
It's also, yes, Amy put it in there. It's like a checklist, right? Like, oh, did they cite Foucault? Did they do this? Did they do their due diligence in understanding the people that I understand and know to be true, and, you know, the voices? And actually in my PhD program, we had a joke about that with dissertation defenses in particular, because there was one professor in the department, the same professor who told me to cite Bourdieu, who always asked a Foucault question during every dissertation defense. And it was very much in like, what do you think the question is going to be? How are you prepared to answer it? Right. And you learn things about people. Unfortunately, we don't have that person here in commerce. No one will force you to answer a question about Foucault here, as far as I know. But it almost became like a running joke, like, oh, there, you know, to prepare for your defense, you better know something about Foucault. How'd you cite him in your work? And that was like a thing I was prepared to do. And fortunately, they did not ask me that question, because I think I turned my committee to thinking about 80 other things. And so we got there and we got past Foucault really quick. But we did talk about power, and that does always, it does partly go back to him. So
yeah.
Rambling on this guy that I don't want to spend forever on, but all that to say, there's purposes for different voices, but I think what the current, that MMU list, those like Black women, and what I even think about in what my own work is, what are the current, who's doing the work now, and how can I take up that work? And do I need to trace it back to where they started? Probably not. Probably can just start with where they are now. Depending on the project. For a dissertation, you might need to trace a little bit more, like, you know, because you're doing more of a lit review, but for an article,
Maybe, to push back to say, you know, at this point, the reader may expect for me to do blah, 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 but I'm doing X, Y, Z. And that, I mean, the identity of Foucault is thus important, but the other part of it is he gets cited all the bloody time. So that means that he's supporting the conversation as it exists. I cannot get him out of my head. But are there other people who are, not being cited, who might be talking about it in a different way, but I can't hear it because I am just, so Foucault's helping me see things in ways. Lenses, the theoretical lenses help us unmake the way we see things. It cracks it open, but I have to be using Foucault goggles. And we don't mean to do all this on Foucault, but I love the cat up there.
Yeah, when you said something ahead and she literally popped up above, I was like, wow, right on cue. She loves to learn, maybe, I don't know. She's not learning very well to stop scratching though, unfortunately. It's okay. Yeah, do you all have questions or anything? And Andrew, that's fine. I think we often say like cis het or cis, and I can't remember the other term, but I'm always learning too. But hey, we all learn stuff every day. I appreciate your candidness though.
That's the difficult part too, is it takes being vulnerable, and I really appreciate you enacting that, Andrew, because I don't want to do that. I want to know the words, and I don't. Jacoby will tell me, he very gently nudged me towards the right direction. I noticed
think that sometimes maybe, I don't know, I can't speak for all first generation students at all, but sometimes I think that is like my first generation way of recognizing that I'm not, it took me a long time to get to this. I think I always was I got to know everything. I got to know it right. I got to know it. I got to be on top of my game, especially as a person of color, especially as a woman, like, especially as XXXX. Like I got to get it right every time. But then over time I learned I'm not going to get it right all the time. And in fact, it's probably better that I don't have it right and that I'm like listening, right? And I do want to cite a wonderful scholar, Temptatious McCoy, who will say like, not just listening to listen, but listening or listening to respond. Sorry, she will say listening to listen, not listening to respond, not listening to enact something, not listening to try to empathize, because we don't always empathize with one another, but listening just truly to listen and take in the message, take it in, and then figure out what to do later. Or maybe not even doing anything at all. Sometimes it's just say, you need to hear this and hear it deeply, and that doing is going to come later. But first, just take in the message. And that like kind of pausing and reflecting, and it's also coming from Asao Inoue. He talks about this in his anti-racist reading practices. We don't do that enough, like frankly, just that like pausing and just sitting with something. And I think that's one of the scary things about academia in the traditional sense is the like publish or perish mentality. Is like you got to go, 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 go. It doesn't always leave you room for pause. What is this person really saying? And so when I said like I was writing out Judith Butler quotes, that was me trying to really understand what is she saying, and not just citing her to cite her, because I was like, I don't want to cite her wrong and misinterpret her, because if she is so well cited, someone's going to know I'm not understanding her and then call me out on it. And then there goes my career. Like, you know, it was like all these like first gen fears, new scholar fears, etc. Still have those, but I wanted to make sure I really was doing my due diligence and like understanding what I was saying and trying to, as I've learned over time, listen, like really, really, really listen. And a lot of times that means I'm not writing. That's okay, because I'm writing in my head what I'm listening to, right? Like I'm taking notes and, you know, that sort of thing. I don't know where I was going with that, but I did want to like, you know, take that moment, like that humility takes time to develop. And it's something if you've taken a class with me, some of you have, that learning, unlearning, relearning, I'm always talking about. And it's an ongoing process. It's never like, it's not you do it once and you're done. Like I unlearned it, I'm done, I'm good. I'm not racist forever. And that's not how anything works. But it is a long-term, lifelong, I would say, thing. And I always say I'm a forever student. Like, and that's, you know, like I have a PhD doesn't mean anything. It means something, but it doesn't. I'm still learning and still a student and still like trying to be better all the time. And doing, you know, I'm doing one of our modules with the university that has like with the Association of Colleges and Universities, and it's all about inclusive and equitable teaching. And I've been doing that. I've been learning. There's some stuff that has been very repetition for me, but hearing it from a different disciplinary perspective is still helpful. And then there's some stuff that I just learned that's brand new to me. I was like, I never heard that term before. That's really interesting. And just like continuing to educate myself, because I think it's a long-term thing. And that's why Cite Black Women is really cool, because it gives you those resources to continue to educate yourself. The podcast, it's less focused on here's a list of people you should cite, but more so, if you really believe in this, here's one avenue to take up. And there's so many, there's Intersectionality Matters, which I think I saw in one of the slides with Kimberly Crenshaw. There's so many like resources like that now. Yeah, the more you know, the more you don't know. Exactly. The more you know, you don't know. Exactly. Right on, Amy. Every single day is an ongoing. Yeah, I do not think I absolutely do not know everything. I know I don't know everything, and I don't think I ever want to. And I'm okay, just continuing to learn. Yeah, I'm rambling. Questions?
You guys definitely, I'm sure, I hope I have questions. Talking about theory, that the argument also is, if we really believe in it, that this is theory, and this, I mean, if theory has one job, and it's to help us see something differently from how we're seeing it, or help us kind of talk about things that sort of felt off but we didn't quite know. You know, like my struggles to figure out what the hell was happening when the Clarence Thomas trial thing. Like, why are there no women, and why don't they understand? It just doesn't make any sense. But then the system also suggests that we are going to cite specific people. So how, Dr. Kumari, how do you listen to the academy and listen to those conversations without getting sucked up into them? Also, I've been watching you for 3 years. How do you navigate being certainly the only person of color in our rec comp department, and without tenure, working closely with someone who has tenure? I mean, how do you navigate that? And yeah.
It's hard. Just everything is, nothing is easy. It's not hard because of the people that make it hard. That's not why it's hard. It's hard because it's a set of choices that I have to make each day, because I could choose to not engage this stuff, right? And just be like, I feel comfortable and I'm fine. I'm just gonna stay in my comfort. But I like have made the conscious choice a long time ago. I don't know when, I can't date it back, but to continue to engage. And part of it's also just ongoing curiosity. And I think that's something you have to have if you're a researcher. Kat's excited. I'm genuinely a curious person. And so just following like multiple voices and keeping track of like book lists, and I like social media. And so I read many different voices every day. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but just like 5-10 minutes on Twitter in the morning. And I'm like, oh, look at this new article just came out. Like people, share their stuff. And I'm like, I'm going to promote their stuff. And I learned that again, I'm going to shout out Temptations McCoy again. Her whole dissertation was on amplification rhetorics. And it's a very powerful piece. And she talks about trap karaoke as well as part of that. It's a really cool multimodal dissertation. I highly recommend seeking out her work. But she talks a lot about who we amplify, right? And I very critically, as a person who's pretty active on Twitter, amplify very specific voices. Like if I see Scholar X, share a thing that's like, all right, that's cool. But if it's about a particular topic that I think more people need to hear or don't get to hear enough, even if I don't even know anything about it, I'm like, this is cool. Like more people need to hear that this is going on, or there's an award out. People need to know that exists, or there's a funding opportunity, or with Eric Pritchard and the Tracing the Stream conference. I sent that to Dr. Carter because I was like, oh my gosh, everyone needs to know about this. Everyone should be at this or checking this out. Maybe not everybody, but you know what I mean? We need to know about this was my like kind of thing. And so I try really hard to share that stuff as much as possible. It is a lot of energy and it is a lot of work, but it's something that I like doing because it makes me feel better, not feel better, me better, and it makes the people around me better. And I want the people around me to also be thinking about that. And I've learned that part of it's also frequency, right? If it is, about who are we seeing over and over, we see Foucault over and over, or algorithms, that kind of thing, right? If we see traces of the stream over and over and over, you're going to do something about it eventually, right? I'm going to keep shoving it in people's faces, and then they'll pay attention. They'll listen eventually, right? Because it's in your face 1,000, like maybe I should look into whatever that is, right? So there's that, and also just being really critical of who I'm following, and I know that it can be easy to get into a silo, especially on social media, right? Because you find the people that think like you and talk about you, and you just live in that circle. But sometimes just remembering like this is one silo. Let me pivot. Let me go to this space. Let me go to this news journal. And maybe that comes from my journalist background. I do have a journalist background, to know to like look for multiple sides in a story, right? And seek out those kind of voices. I see Jacoby's question in the chat: a better practice for navigating listening, citing a scholarship versus listening, citing a community that informs your research. What's a better practice? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think like, why not both? Do we need to only cite one or the other?
Can I jump in, Dr.
Yeah.
Kumari? Because I think that what you're always so humble about how you navigate this. Like I just listen, but you listen in a very particular way. When you send me stuff, I know it's been curated. You know what I mean? So I'm on these anti-racist publishing practices for journals that have been gatekeepers. And I tell them, we should, they're all saying we need to cite, stop citing the same people, but they don't know who the hell to cite. And I said, I don't either. So Shawn could gently sense, I don't think, I was just interested. It happened naturally. But the thing that I need to do as a teacher, as a human, is I need to remember where the hell those came from, because otherwise I'm going to absorb them and then it's ta-da, me again. You know, I'm in here, I made it. Thanks for the passage. I am so social justicey. Come and worship me. So
That's not
yeah,
my goal.
no, I know,
Yeah.
no, not at all. What I'm trying to say
Yeah.
is that I could silence you and without realizing it, by not paying super attention and speaking to how these things come into my life. How do I know what I know? That's the epistemology. Always asking yourselves, how do I know what I know? Yeah, so that's my,
And that kind of gets to Heather's question, what's the best way to keep track? And I do say every system works differently for every person. I'm kind of very type A. Dr. Carter, I think you're not as type A. And I don't know what, and a type A meaning like I'm very organized and have systems for a lot of things. If you've taken a class with me, you've seen my Google Drive and you've seen that it is heavily curated and color coded, and I'll share it just for fun for a second. And it's just my way. This is what my brain looks like sometimes. Am I perfectly organized? Absolutely not. My desk is a mess. But this, for example, is what my Google Drive looks like. It is curated in a really particular way, by color, by category, by type. It makes me happy. But this is how my brain thinks. This is not a system for everyone, I recognize, because not everyone thinks this way, right? But I think learning to find a system that works for me, yeah, you can color code. It's super cool. It changes everything. Right click, and there's a change color, and look at that, amazing. Life changing. I'm sorry, I always have to plug that. I think it's one of the best things in the world. But finding that system takes a long time, right? And I know everyone's got different systems for different things. I like digital systems and paper systems. I do a mix. I have like a paper planner in front of me right now that you can't see, but having that system built in helps me curate those things a little quicker. So right now, my system has been send it to the group chat that I have with Dr. Carter, our Rec Comp team, Dr. Carter and Dr. Lowe, and I'll just send them the tweet because I know for a fact that both of them are not actively on social media the same way I am. And I'm like, oh, this is something they might be missing, but I don't want them to miss it because I want them in on that conversation too, because I consider them my friends as well, right? And it's the same thing. I see other people share stuff all the time too, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And citation works, and with Twitter is easy because it's who shared it, right? But then also keeping and I don't do this all the time. This is like sometimes a weekend thing while I'm watching a movie project, right? I curate content. I just kind of keep track of it. So this is a folder of anti-racist books and articles. As you can see, it's messy, right? Because a lot of it's just like me dragging and dropping things as I see. But there was a time where I was like, I have some time. I will sit here and take up all these Instagram sources that I've been saving on my phone and make a space for them. So I here's the link, here's the source, keeping track. This is what the thing is talking about, because images get lost on the internet all the time. And this is just me kind of archiving for myself and for no one else, unless they want to see it. And I'm happy to share it. These various Instagram posts that I saw around summer 2020 that were really interesting. And I was like, and they're coming from organizations that don't get a lot of space. So I had already shared them to try to amplify them further, but I also wanted to save them somewhere because that's my way to continue to listen to them. Because I think sometimes on social media, especially, you see it, you share it, and you're like, oh, it's gone. It was there yesterday in my brain, where'd it go? And so this was just like, I have some time, I'm going to throw on a movie and just kind of actively curate this stuff for a minute. I've read it, it's interesting. And then I go back to it when I need a reminder of something. I was like, oh, let me reflect on this today. What are some accountability questions? These are great teaching resources for me too, because as you can see from my pop culture article, I think that a lot of the scholars that we don't cite are not published yet because they haven't had the power, the space, or the privilege to do that, right?
That's
and
the
so
point.
That's why, yeah, and that's why resources like this are amazing, because it's like I don't remember where this is coming from, but this is from Praxis Chi, and I look into their organization, and I'm like, okay, so this is utilizing a lens of anti-oppression, redefine group and organizational culture so people feel empowered to bring their full selves to the table. And they've got lots of resources, and I'm like, I can follow along. They've got them bilingually. I think it's really powerful. And so, somebody might follow on Instagram so that they're coming up in my feed over and over. It's creating an algorithm. It's like me, controlling my algorithm a little bit so that I'm being hit by these things over and over, and also helpful reminders, right? So just saving this content and taking a little time to do this is kind of a fun project for me, but not for everyone. But even if I was just saving the links or bookmarking them, that is a starting place. But I think what we often fall into traps with, especially with the amount of content that's out there, is we save it, but we do nothing with it, right? It just kind of sits in a folder. I have a lot of that as well, that one day I will get to. And I always say I will get to it. But it's one of those like, you know what, I've got 10 minutes. What else am I doing? Da, 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 da. Let me spend 10 minutes on this and I'm done. And it's organized. It's in a place for me. That's my system. And again, I cannot emphasize enough. It works for me, but it might not work for you. So I did want to share, like, here are some ways that you might do this, but also this is also my system, the like drag and drop the stuff here and then use the search feature to, find it later when I need the keywords. Like I'm teaching a class on bell hooks in summer one. And so like recently I was just looking up everything that I have on, there's my hooks, line and singers. Everything that I have on bell hooks in my drive, because I've been curating this stuff for a long time. I just haven't had the opportunity to do anything with it. And so now as I'm planning this class, I'm going to go through all of this stuff that I've been just saving forever on here and use this time as a like, all right, I have an exigence. Let me curate this in a way that's useful. And then here are the citations right in front of me. I'm just going to make it more organized and not, listy. But yeah, look at that intro and hook section draft, 7/30/2014.
Wow.
I was very much saving, like, I'm like, I can't find the folder, but I was doing this for some reason. Like, I don't think I do it anymore, but I think it's interesting.
Dr. Kumar, can you say something about the accountability? Made me think about you speak a lot about diversity, inclusion, and equity and accountability, and that's the theorizing that I think is, I mean, I still think what you're doing is theorizing. I'm certain of it. And that's why we need all this. But you've got a really beautifully packaged way to help us push back on some of those easy answers and the role of accountability specifically.
That's a really good question. Because I often fight for spaces to be more accountable. But what does that mean? So that means that I do a thing and it's done is not good enough. I do a thing and it needs to be checked and followed up with and taken up in more steps beyond today, right? And that sounds really vague because it is. Because I don't know if there's a concrete answer to that. So for me, accountability looks like if I'm going to say that I'm an ally, or if other people are going to count on me as an ally, I should say, because I don't get to say that, other people get to say that. If they're going to count on me as an ally, or count on me as an advocate, or if they're going to count on me as this person who aligns herself with social justice as a teacher and a scholar, I have to show up and do that work every day or live it every day. And so the accountability for me is to make sure that I do my due diligence and doing that work.
I should have framed it differently. I don't mean you being accountable. I mean you holding other people accountable, or we hold ourselves accountable, because where we just check a box and like, why do you don't like the DEI stuff? Because it's not accountability. This is just I did a thing, right? And so we have to
and it's not all, I would never say everything is always this way.
No.
Right? For the most part, when you hear the words DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion initiative, it has icky undertones. And my take on that is that a lot of times it's a Band-Aid solution. And what I mean by that, it's a temporary solution. It's not long-term. It's not creating a structural change or an institutional change. And for long-term change to happen, it has to be structural, institutional, it has to be lived. And that's what I was saying. You never want to just cite someone to cite someone. It has to be somebody you believe in your core, actually works for the project. And that sounds really deep and intense, but you'll know if you really believe in that work and makes sense for your project, right? So for me, and this is something that comes over time, and it is scary, especially pre-tenure, because I don't have the tenure powers, which is what I say Dr. Carter has on, use your tenure powers. because it's like a superpower. Whoop, my watch also doesn't know. But yeah, diversity, equity, inclusion, as Jacoby's saying in the chat, is the outcome. Equity is going to be the process on how we get it. Yeah, absolutely. And I often share, like, there's great graphic that I think many of you have probably seen before, equity, equality. I can find it real quick. I shared it in class the other day too. And I also love that you brought up danger of a single story, because I think that's related too, but hang on, get it on the right screen. I've got two monitors over here. That it's, what we say we're working toward isn't necessarily what we're working toward in action. And I think that's when it gets icky and messy. And so here's what I'm talking about. This is the equality versus equity, because I think a lot of times these initiatives are working toward the first one. They think they're working toward equity, and like, oh, we're working toward DEI, diversity. We've got people of color in our program, diversity, check. We are working toward equity, and really what's happening is equality. Like, everyone has access to X, and it's like, but do they have the same access is the question that turns it toward the equity, right? And so this graphic is great. Trying to make it bigger on my screen, because it really shows in a very simple comic structure the difference, right? Because equality, all of them were given the same tool, right? They were all given the box, the crate to stand on, so that everyone, we gave everyone the same resources, yay, equality. However, the same resources don't work the same for everyone, right? As you can see in the image in the left-hand side, two of the people still aren't getting the best experience. Actually, one of them is really not getting the best experience at all. The one in the middle is getting a better experience, but it needs work. But for equity to happen, we have to give everyone resources, but also recognize that those resources have to be revised for different people with different contexts and backgrounds. And I think that's where often these initiatives get stuck. It's like a simple solution is give everyone the same thing, but not everyone needs the same thing. And I think that's when the work has to come back. So for me, the accountability, and thank you for letting me share that for a second. The accountability part is when people are, when anyone is, I did this thing and I'm like, great. Okay. So how did you think about this community when you did that? And I'm not the gotcha police. That's not my goal either. Like, I'm not trying to be like, did you leave out somebody? Because sometimes it's not about that, but to say, how is this going to impact these communities? Have you thought about them? Is my way to try to hold people accountable. Just say have you thought about them? Because you might not have. And I've quoted her all week this week, which is kind of great. But I had this wonderful mentor at Louisville who is our DEI. That was her job. She was like the director of that program, and she didn't like her title either, which I thought was really amusing. She's the one who kind of opened my eyes to that. But she always says, I can't change your mind. I'm not going to change your mind, but I can change your experience. And I love that framing of it, because it reminds me as a teacher also, my job is not to change students' minds or anybody's minds, researchers' minds, et cetera, but being exposed to the conversation I might be bringing up, or the topics, or the keywords, et cetera, the scholars, et cetera, I am going to change their experience 100%, because you're going to be at least thinking about it, even for a minute. And I'm like, if one person is thinking about that thing when they walk out of the room, I'm doing great. I'm doing my job. I am educating and trying to get that information out there. And I think that's where accountability also comes in, because I think sometimes we get stuck in DEI. We got to change everything. And it's like, you're not going to. You can't just change everyone's mind with the required initiative. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So you can, and I don't want to.
He has a question, but before he does, can I ask you to pull that equity thing back up, because I want to end with you guys looking at that and thinking about citation practices, because if we're looking at the field, and what needs to be undone. So sorry, Jacoby, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that was exactly it. Because I have these conversations at the CDC, specifically around not changing minds, but changing experiences. But even before that, exposing folks to people's experiences, because that's where the understanding comes in. Because there's this universal lens that folks feel like, oh, okay, well, we give out the same resources, so everyone has the same experience, but that's not it. Even with I was against the whole sending poor COVID tests home, because I'm like, that's not equitable. What happens to a family who has 4 and they get 4 tests, so everybody's covered? But what happens to those families who have 6 or 7 folks? You get the same resources, but it's not equitable. like everyone doesn't have the same opportunity, regardless of you sending home the same thing, and it's not well thought out. So I always use that example to kind of explain equity in a lot of spaces, and people just get it. But no, I appreciate it. This brought up the conversation. I really do.
Jacoby,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And I'm so glad you do the job you do, because we need you to do to keep reminding people. You're absolutely right. I was so mad too about that too. It's like, but my family has 4, but my cousin's family has 5. What are they going to do with the one kid? Like, or one person in their family gets left out. That's not equitable. I think that's
Exactly.
powerful. That's a really good, like, current example of that in practice. Wow. Yeah.
I just to riff off of that, this example is just so helpful to thinking about citations, but anything, because nobody's thinking, oh, screw those people who have more kids. They just don't think that they have more kids. So it doesn't come. So as Jacoby was saying, listening to the stories of experiences that are unlike ours, not to feed those in and give them a rah celebration like it's MLK Day, but like, what do we have to do to unmake all the things that we think we know, which we have to. So if the theorizing comes from experience, but it can't come from mine because I'm experiencing a world that was kind of built in some ways for me. And but what if we listen to other stories, and what if I pay attention to where, and we all do, where it's coming from? So that is why the citation chase is something that I'm obsessing about right now, because to me, that's one way to do accountability. But when we, but I want you guys, I'm going to have a couple of posts that I want you guys to deal with. But I want us to look at this together and think through what that might mean if we're talking about a Burkean parlor, but that Burkean parlor is not going to work. We're talking about the traces of a stream. If it's a stream, what do we listen? How do we listen? And the fence is gatekeeping. I don't know. Let's just get all poetic about it. So, yeah.
It's definitely gatekeeping. Like, I always think about that layer of it too. And I'm like, we don't talk enough about that fact that they're behind a fence. Like, they aren't even allowed in the stadium.
Not even in the audience.
Yeah, it's like, so we still have a problem here, right? Like, no one's talking about that in the picture, but they're not technically in the stadium, which is
And who's on the field? And yes,
yeah, who's on the field, who's in the stadium. But the fact that we even needed the crates in the first place, because they aren't even in the room. They're not in the Burkean parlor. That's a bigger problem to figure out later. This is a deep comic. I love a comic like this. I'm like, we could spend a semester talking about this and all of its issues too, but
I agree. I agree. And that's the point of all of this. We are not just citing to cite. We are, you guys, this is a research class, so we have to think about what it is that we're doing with citations. And if the citations are to unmake the way that we already understand a thing, rather than find evidence to support the thing that we already know, then why bother, as I always say. But if we're going to, journey out and gather up other people's ideas. And I will also say, Foucault just kind of broke me open, but this work that I'm doing with cultural geographies and things that are embedded in Black women's experiences, that is knocking me out of the park. I have never been so, I love theory. I've been reading theory all the time, but back in the 90s, that blew my mind. I lost it, but it's amazing. And it's based on story, guys. This is easy. It's easy to read, but you got to pay attention because it's not easy. You got to really root in there. So yeah. Anything else? We want to thank Dr. Kumari for her fabulousness for coming, and
thank you.
And Amy, this was good team. So yeah, I really appreciate this. And you know where to find Dr. Kumari. Amy's in our class, so you can find her there, and we'll have one more workshop with her towards the end. I will, rather than take up more time of your time, I will record just a short thing that will talk about the next things. But basically, you just have 2 more questions, and it'll be in the forum, and the midterm will be over. Okay. All right. Well, I'll hang out for anybody if anybody wants to chat. This was a delight. And I'll remember to turn this off this time.